Marvel is spinning up something we haven't seen in several years, but adding a dash of darkness and grit to it. That doesn't mean, though, that they didn't make a few mistakes along the way. Let's dive into a no-spoiler breakdown of Thunderbolts.
Marvel Studios Thunderbolts.
My name is Kyle. Thank you for stopping by to watch the very first movie breakdown on Movie Tactics, a channel where we not only discuss the movies, the characters, the story itself, as someone who really enjoys film, but also someone who has a lot of experience in props and firearms and swords and knives and axes, all of the tools that make movies and action scenes memorable. We're going to do an analysis and breakdown on those types of props as well. And at the end, I'm going to tell you about what I think about the movie. This is a no spoiler review, so you'll understand a little bit about what you're going to get into and some of the mistakes you might see throughout the movie that you might want to follow along and watch and see for yourself.
Whoa. Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
Thunderbolts just came out on May 1st, 2025 from Marvel Studios and Disney. It's actually rounding out Phase 5 of the MCU. So the last few years have been a little rocky for Marvel, so I wasn't really sure what to expect going into this movie, and I spotted a couple of big mistakes, but overall my impressions were pretty good, but were the actual reviews overhyped? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, the cast of this movie, of course, is fantastic, and it's bringing back some of your fan favorites. Florence Pugh comes back as Yelena Belova. Sebastian Stan, of course, comes back as Bucky. Julia Louis-Dreyfus is Valentina. David Harbour is Alexei. Wyatt Russell comes back, and there's a few other familiar faces and some new ones as well that pop up. This isn't a spoiler review, so I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it is a good group that is kind of after the Avengers, and the Avengers are mentioned throughout this entire movie, and there's actually quite a lot of jokes made about talking about Captain America and Thor and kind of going through the motions of what happened in Infinity War and Endgame. So that was good to see as someone who's watched all of the Marvel movies over the years, especially the initial set from the early 2000s all the way through. That's kind of what I grew up with, and Endgame kind of really rounded everything out for me, kind of going through the motions with all those characters over all those years. So it's good to kind of see them still going back and putting some light on those characters and kind of joking about it. So here's the story setup. Thunderbolts brings together Marvel's misfit mercenaries, right? Really led by Yelena, but a lot of the other characters kind of join in. And we see this in the trailer. Now, there are no Avengers, right? They are not the Avengers. They kind of continue on the story of the Avengers are gone. You know, a lot of them dispersed after Endgame, and we've seen that in the MCU. What's more important was these ragtag group of mercenaries kind of come together and form this group of odd superpowers, no capes, and really just questionable morals overall. In fact, they're referred to as villains throughout, and we've heard this before. They're kind of like the black sheep, as it were, of the MCU. Speaking of MCU, though, one of the things I think that kind of is refreshing for this movie, and you kind of can tell from the trailers as well, is it's not focused on the multiverse. I think whether it's just Marvel fatigue or superhero fatigue or whatever it is, MCU bringing in the whole multiverse over and over again, trying new things, just seemed to get kind of old. I had a great time watching like the latest Deadpool versus Wolverine. But that being said, it's kind of refreshing to kind of get back to a gritty superhero movie that this really is, with these almost villain-like characters. So this team of Thunderbolts, and you learn in the movie what Thunderbolts is and where it comes from. Now, there is a whole series in the comic books, and there's a bunch of different characters in the Thunderbolts, and that's kind of why there's a little asterisk on the title there. They're not really sure if that's a name that's going to stick, but it's a pretty funny background on where the name came from. I had a good laugh about it. But that being said, one of the key parts here of a Marvel movie is the action scenes, right? We're there to see the action scenes. I think the CGI did really well to kind of blend real and CGI, practical effects. Now, action really makes or breaks a Marvel film. I think a lot of people say a lot of the action could be either poor acting or just bad choreography, you know, spinning 3 times and then shooting, or throwing your sword and then catching it as you spin in the air just to kind of charge at someone. Things like like that are just kind of just whimsical and kind of cheesy. And I think some people ever seen since like John Wick, for example, John Wick really took that next level of choreography and using firearms and other weapons and things like that. This movie is very typical Marvel. Marvel's never really been big on firearms. Of course, like Black Widow is very famous with her Glocks, and Yelena kind of takes on that a little bit in this movie. But there are some scenes that are very interesting. There's a scene where they're all kind of trapped in a vault, all fighting it out, duking it out, these mercenaries. And you've seen this in the trailer. You know, John Walker, he's a U.S. agent at this point. He's not really the Captain America anymore. He comes out with a WE High Kappa 7.0, which is kind of a mocked up 45, 1911, 2011 type of firearm. And he even mentions that down the way where he's like, oh, I got my 45 with a long extended barrel on there. But what's funny is, this is one of the first mistakes that I've noticed is when they're fighting in a vault scene, they go and he's shooting and he runs out of ammo in a few rounds and then throws the gun. But then 3 minutes later, he has that gun holstered and grabs the gun and shoots some more. And a lot of the guards are using like Glocks, it looks like. A lot of them use like Glock 17 throughout the whole movie. But he's still kind of picking up these guns that he's grabbing, and they're claiming they're all out of ammo. So where are they reloading? I don't know. Not really a John Wick type of movie. It's a Marvel movie, right? So, but it's funny, he has it holstered back, ready to go to pull out again and shoot some more. Now, I will say Yelena mentions her Glock 19. She says, I carry a 19. I love it, which is great because she's got probably smaller hands. So her Glock 19 is an awesome choice for her. And that being said, she uses it very well. And not only that, I've seen some good tactics with her. Not a lot of like reloads or anything like that, but, you know, finger straight off the trigger, things like that when you're running around and all that. It seemed like a decent amount of training was put into at least handling and using some of these props. Now, I believe Black Widow used to use twin Glock 26s, if I'm not mistaken, which are like the shorter, subcompact, really, Glocks. But in this movie, Yelena is seen grabbing Glock 43s, and there's been a couple of scenes where she has these 43s, must be as backups because they come out of nowhere, really, because her 19 seems to be her main sidearm there, but she doesn't really have dual wielding or anything like that, it looks like. But that being said, that was kind of Black Widow's thing. But I think as firearms evolved, the 26 was really hot maybe 15 years ago as the subcompact, but now the 43 and the 43X is kind of taken over the spot for that, at least from a Glock standpoint. So I can kind of see how Marvel chose that as a good prop gun for her to kind of pick up in several of the shootouts. Bucky is seen really quick in a scene with a SIG P226. I love a good P226. And then he also has a Scorpion, which is interesting. It's actually a CZVZ 6.1 Scorpion. So it's just a little guy, and he goes and uses it in a scene to kind of take out the bad guy, right? Who is actually the main villain of this movie. So you'll see that. Now the bad guy soldiers led by Valentina and her organization all seem to be using some form of Colt M4, highly modified with different ACOGs and lights and stocks and things like that, depending on what they're using. In fact, a few of them had underbarrel grenade launchers used for what appears to be smoke or tear gas. In fact, there's a whole bunch of scenes where they're like, use non-lethal, and they proceed to fire a bunch of rounds of 5.56 into the superhero. So I guess non-lethal is 5.56 in some of these superhero movies. But that being said, I do see some tear gas and some smoke and things like that being utilized as well. There's also a Remington 870 Master Key shotgun that guard goes and sticks out the window at one point. There's actually a really neat Humvee scene where there's Browning M2 50 cal machine guns that are robotically modified on top of Humvees that they're driving, that they use so they can kind of remote control them. And then Bucky, even in the trailer, has an FN MK13 grenade launcher that's been modified for magnetic mines on top of the firearms that are extensively used throughout this movie to no avail, since superheroes tend to be usually pretty bulletproof or have some sort of armor or shield or something to kind of help them against any type of rounds. Yelena and a few other characters have some unique hand-to-hand combat type weapons. Yelena pulls out these ice pick looking extendable axes that she uses throughout. She also has the electric bracelets where you have like that punch that goes on and shocks anyone you hit. Makarovs make an appearance in this movie, which makes sense with the Black Widow and Yelena vibes with their past with Russia. And Makarovs lives are shown a couple of times where one is suppressed and then there are a bunch of them being field stripped and put back together as a training exercise. Just some nice choreography overall and some good use of your standard superhero weaponry. Let's talk about the characters and the performances. I didn't see any bad actors in this movie. I thought everyone was really into the scenes. They really enjoyed what they were doing. They really understood the plot, understood what their tone should be. And there are some new faces in this movie that you will recognize from other movies, and they add some nice, more bright kind of vibes to a rather dark movie. In fact, this movie is one of the darker Marvel type movies that I've seen in a long time. A lot of the scenes bring back things from the past. And if you can imagine mercenaries who are killing for money, as we've seen Yelena do in the past, and those guys, that really brings up some hard memories, I think, and they even show kind of some more shocking scenes really over and over again in this movie that I was not expecting. And even Bucky has a funny scene. He's just talking about, how was your past? Oh, I'm sure it was great. It was great. I had a great upbringing. Everyone in the theater is like, what? He's like, just trauma, just straight trauma from his past, and they're bringing all the dark scenes back in with this movie. So again, this is much more of a dark and more dangerous type of vibe than a lot of the Marvel movies more recently. And there is some comic relief in this movie. I'm talking about all the past Marvel characters and kind of bringing them up to speed on where they are now or how they would have done something, and how this new Thunderbolts group is different from the Avengers. And it was just kind of great to kind of just relive some of those moments. They were kind of poking fun at things that have happened in Marvel movies. And the best part is you don't have to understand from a story point really where these guys are now, because they go back and they'll say a quick line and be like, well, I used to do this and now I'm here. And they actually go through the motions of kind of describing the characters in brief synopses. So if you haven't seen all these other Marvel movies and shows and all this stuff that you really would normally have to understand to get a movie and understand the characters, they give you an idea of where they're coming from, what they are. And they do it in a way where it's not too obvious as well, which is good to see. Now, looking at some of the comedic characters like the Red Guardian, David Harbour, right? He comes back and he's like talking about, I do this now because, I'm fine with my life. And he has like some really boring job in DC, and you'll see that.
Your subordinates will be reported to DoorDash HQ.
Alexi, it's me. Open up.
Then he's like kind of breaking down, like, I miss being a superhero, or like, I'm a Russian copycat of the American superheroes. And it was just good to kind of see some comic relief in there in an otherwise dark movie. The story and tone of this movie is no Avengers level type of movie, but it's more of a classic, maybe Civil War type of a pace for a movie where it's just constant, something new action, new scenes, something I've never seen before out of Marvel, and there's not some 30-minute lull that you've seen in some of these movies where you're like, okay, let's just go get some more popcorn and come back. I mean, I haven't really had to do that in a lot of Marvel movies, but I felt that some of the movies really did drag in the middle a little bit, and this movie didn't seem to drag at all. In fact, I was almost on the edge of my seat the whole movie. Nothing really took me out of the movie or took me out of the scenes, which was great to see, because that is something that's really hard to do and not seen very much in this day and age in 2025 for movies. From a technical aspect, and we've already talked about the cinematography a little bit with the CGI versus realistic kind of props and things they use, and of course there's superpowers and the weapons and all that, but the superpowers are like use the force, like reaching your hand out and things like that. But that being said, they did a really good job blending all the graphics together. I think the overall tone and the colors and the Battle of New York City and all that you kind of see in the shadows and all that stuff you see in the trailers, that was all done really well. And it's a very unique type of villain, I think, to kind of go and approach and also set up this team of Thunderbolts and talk about how their pasts kind of help with where they are today and how they are totally different from the Avengers and where they're going next. Now that brings me to the second issue that I saw in this movie, and you'll have to watch the movie, so go watch the movie, see if you see the same issue I saw. From a technical aspect, I don't know who was editing this part of the movie, but there's always something little here and there you can kind of spot, especially in Marvel movies. I think there's so many extras, so much going on. I get it. But that being said, there's a scene where they're outside. The Thunderbolts are all talking outside on the street of New York City, and a woman walks by, an extra walks by in a gray coat, like a gray suit jacket looking thing, right? Walks by and she kind of like just like stares at the group all awkwardly in the background, maybe like 3 yards behind Yelena. And she just stares at them and like has like this weird look on her face and then looks forward and then walks away all awkwardly. And you kind of see her walking away. You see the back of her gray coat walking away. I'm like, well, that was weird. Why is that extra doing that? Well, no more than a couple minutes later, you notice that that same lady is walking away in the same scene with them still talking. So like a minute later, you see the gray coat still walking in the same spot. So I'm like, so they must have cut all these characters and this woman's still walking. That's the slowest walk in the world. I don't know what to tell you, but watch for the lady in the gray coat. When you see this movie, it was like, what? I was thinking maybe that's like a demon from the past or something. It'll be something related to the story, but no, it had nothing to do with the story as far as I could tell. It was just an extra and it was really awkward. But those are the kind of details I enjoy kind of seeing. I was like, wow, I can't believe someone missed that. At the end of the day, Thunderbolts is just Marvel doing Marvel, but more OG Marvel, like Winter Soldier. Not quite maybe Winter Soldier or Civil War 2.0. There's just enough darkness and grit in there, I think, to kind of help it stand out a bit. And honestly, it's worth a watch just from an entertaining standpoint. As a film guy, as someone who's watched Marvel throughout the years and all the movies and tried to catch all the new shows, even though how ridiculous some of them are being all over the different platforms, I want to say I will give this movie 8 out of 10 cheesy gordita crunches.
Yo quiero Taco Bell.
I really enjoyed it. Like I said, there's no lull. It's dark. It's gritty. It's more OG Marvel where you really kind of have an interesting villain. You have a nice arc. You have something that's going to happen at the end that's going to help you kind of understand where Marvel is going. And whether that means that Marvel is back, it's going to be up to us, up to Marvel to kind of see if they can pull this off, and this next couple of movies coming out are really going to define if Marvel is still something that captivates us, because I know we're kind of dragging a little bit the last few years. We're not sure where it's going. So if you see the movie, check it out. What are your thoughts on this movie? Do you think Marvel is back? Hit them down in the comments. Thank you for watching this far. And if you did watch this far, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This is a new channel, so we're trying to get this thing taken off. Every week, I'm going to bring you a new movie review. So stay tuned for what's coming up next. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.